The fluorescent lights in the courthouse hallway hummed with a frequency that matched the tremor in my hands. I pressed my palms against the cool marble bench, trying to absorb some of its solidity, its permanence. 5 years of marriage reduced to signatures on documents that felt heavier than they should, each page a small death. The elevator doors opened with a mechanical sigh, and there he was. Derek stepped out wearing the charcoal suit I'd helped him pick out for his promotion last year, the one he'd probably worn to meet her. Them, however many there had been. His lawyer, Marcus Friedman, followed like a well-dressed shadow, briefcase swinging with practiced efficiency. I'd always noticed details. It was what made me good at my job, back when I had one. Interior design required an eye for the small things, the way light fell across a surface, the barely perceptible differences in fabric textures, the psychological impact of color temperatures. Now, that same attention to detail had become a curse. I noticed everything about Derek that I'd spent 5 years memorizing, and everything that had changed since I discovered the affair. The way his wedding ring was already gone, leaving no tan line because he'd probably stopped wearing it months ago. The faint smell of a different cologne, sharper and more expensive than the one I used to buy him. The ease in his shoulders, as if signing away our marriage was just another business transaction. Vivian. His voice carried the same casual warmth he used with colleagues. Not cold enough to be cruel. Not warm enough to suggest regret. Just neutral. As if I were a pleasant acquaintance he'd run into at a coffee shop. Derek? I kept my own voice steady, proud when it didn't crack. Marcus, this is my wife. Soon-to-be ex-wife, I should say. He actually smiled when he said it, that easy charisma that had first attracted me at a gallery opening 7 years ago. Vivian, you remember Marcus. He handled the prenup. The prenup I'd signed without reading carefully, because I'd been so in love, so certain we'd never need it. The prenup that was now stripping me of everything we'd built together. The brownstone in Park Slope that I'd renovated room by room. The vacation property in the Catskills. Even the joint savings account that I'd contributed to equally despite taking 3 years off to support his career transition. Let's make this quick, Marcus said, pulling documents from his briefcase with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Mrs. Aldridge, your attorney isn't present? I couldn't afford to keep her on retainer. The admission tasted like ash. I reviewed everything. I know what I'm signing. Derek made a small sound, something between sympathy and satisfaction. Well, you should have thought about financial planning before you decided to make such a dramatic exit, Viv, throwing my belongings into the street like some sort of spurned housewife from a soap opera. The memory of that night burned behind my eyes. Coming home early from visiting my sister to surprise him for our anniversary. Finding him in our bed, the bed I'd spent weeks selecting, the frame I'd restored myself, with someone who worked in his office. The red haze of rage that followed, the primal need to purge his presence from my space. You were in our bed, I said quietly, each word precise. With someone who wasn't your wife. Which you still haven't proven, despite hiring that investigator. He leaned against the marble pillar, crossing his arms. Pretty convenient that all those photos you claim to have mysteriously disappeared before the divorce proceedings. They hadn't disappeared. I'd given them to my attorney, who'd then informed me that Derek's lawyer had gotten them ruled inadmissible on a technicality. Some issue with privacy laws and how the investigator had obtained them. Marcus Friedman was expensive and very, very good at his job. Can we just sign the papers? My throat felt tight, each breath an effort. Of course. That's why we're here. Derek pushed off from the pillar, suddenly all business. Marcus will walk you through each section. It's all pretty straightforward. You keep your grandmother's jewelry, your personal effects, your car. Everything else reverts to me per the prenup terms. The brownstone, the Catskills property, the investments, all mine. I renovated that brownstone, I heard myself saying, hating the pleading note that crept into my voice. I spent 3 years playing house while I built a career that paid for those renovations. His smile was gentle, which somehow made it worse. Viv, I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm just being realistic. You made choices. This is the consequence. The choices I'd made, putting my design business on hold to support his career, turning down the job offer in Seattle because he didn't want to relocate, spending my inheritance from my grandmother on the brownstone down payment because he said it was investing in our future. Marcus laid the documents across the bench in neat rows, each stack clipped and flagged with colored tabs. If you'll just sign where indicated, Mrs. Aldridge, initial here, here, and here. Full signature on the final page of each section. My hand moved mechanically, pen scratching across paper. Each signature felt like giving away a piece of myself. The brownstone with its original crown molding that I'd painstakingly restored. The garden where I'd spent every spring coaxing roses to bloom. The studio space in the attic where I'd planned to restart my design business once Derek's career was more established. All of it, signed away in blue ink that looked too cheerful for the death of a marriage. There. I set down the pen, my hand cramping. It's done. Not quite. Derek accepted the documents from Marcus, flipping through to verify each signature. His thoroughness felt like an insult, as if he didn't trust me to even end our marriage correctly. I need to say something before we part ways, Viv. For closure. Closure. As if this were a business deal being finalized, a project being completed, rather than the dismantling of everything I'd built my adult life around. I don't think... I began. But he was already talking. That familiar confidence in his voice that used to make me feel safe, and now just made me feel small. You need to understand something. What happened between us, it wasn't working for a long time. You became so focused on the house, on your little design projects, on creating the perfect domestic space. You stopped being the woman I married, ambitious, exciting, spontaneous. He tucked the signed documents into his briefcase with care. I need someone who matches my energy, my drive. Someone who's building something, not just maintaining. The words landed like physical blows, each one precise and carefully aimed at the soft parts of me that were already bleeding. Because there was truth in them, twisted and cruel, but truth nonetheless. I had poured myself into that brownstone, into creating a home, because I believed that's what we were building together. A foundation. A life. I'm sure you'll move on eventually, Derek continued, and something in his tone made me look up. He was smiling now, that easy charm fully engaged, but there was something else underneath it. Smugness. Satisfaction. Though let's be honest, Viv, you'll never really get over me. Over this. I was your first real relationship, your first everything. You built your entire identity around being my wife. The marble bench felt cold beneath my palms, grounding me as the room seemed to tilt. Around us, the courthouse bustled with its usual chaos, lawyers conferring with clients, families waiting for hearings, the steady drone of institutional bureaucracy. Normal people having normal, terrible days, their tragedies as mundane as mine. That's quite a thing to say. My voice sounded distant, detached, as if it belonged to someone else. It's honest. He shrugged, checking his watch. A new Rolex I'd never seen before. Probably a gift from whoever had replaced me. Look, I'm not trying to be cruel. I'm trying to help you understand reality so you can move forward. You were a good wife, Viv. You'll make someone a great domestic partner someday. But you need to accept that what we had, it was special. Probably the best relationship you'll ever have. And that's okay. Not everyone gets to have that twice. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, clearly wanting to end this conversation and move on to his next appointment. But Derek seemed energized by his own monologue, warming to his theme. "Think about it rationally," he said, using the same patient tone he'd used when explaining why I should give up the Seattle job offer. "You're 28, starting over with essentially nothing. No career momentum, no real assets, no professional network since you let all of that atrophy. Your friends are all my friends, really. Your social circle was built around me. Even your identity was built around being Derek Aldridge's wife." He wasn't wrong. I'd realized that in the 3 months since I'd left, crashing on my sister's couch because I couldn't afford first and last month's rent on an apartment. Watching my phone stay silent because everyone we knew had chosen sides, and they'd chosen his. Updating my resume and seeing the 3-year gap where my career should have grown. So here's my advice for old time's sake. Derek's hand landed on my shoulder, a gesture of comfort that felt like ownership. Take some time. Heal. Maybe take a trip somewhere to clear your head. But don't expect to find anything like what we had. Don't waste your time trying to replace me because you can't. I was it for you, Viv. The big love. And that's actually a beautiful thing, if you can accept it. He squeezed my shoulder once, then released it, already turning away. Marcus will file everything tomorrow. You should be officially divorced within 30 days. Good luck with everything, Vivian. I really do wish you the best. And then he was gone, striding toward the elevator with Marcus in tow, leaving me alone on the marble bench surrounded by the ghosts of signatures and the echo of his words. "You'll never get over me." The phrase repeated in my mind like a mantra, like a curse. And the worst part was that sitting there in that courthouse hallway, watching him disappear behind closing elevator doors, I believed him. I gathered my purse, my hand steadier now that the signing was finished. The courthouse exit beckoned with the promise of fresh air, escape from the fluorescent lights and institutional beige walls. But I paused at the massive windows overlooking the street, watching the city move below. Cars and pedestrians, everyone rushing somewhere important, everyone with purposes and destinations. Derek's voice echoed in my head. "You'll never really get over me." I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, feeling the vibration of the city against my skin. 3 months ago, I would have believed him, would have accepted his narrative of my life, my limitations, my future. But standing there, something shifted. Maybe it was the finality of those signed documents. Maybe it was the utter emptiness of starting over with nothing to lose. Or maybe it was just rage, finally, burning through the numbness. "You'll never get over me. Watch me," I whispered to the glass, to the ghost of his voice, to the woman I'd been when I'd first walked into this building. I didn't know how yet, didn't have a plan beyond surviving the next day, the next week. But Derek had made one critical mistake in his perfectly crafted dismissal of me, of our marriage, of my future. He'd underestimated how much I'd learned about becoming someone new when you had nothing left to lose. I pushed away from the window and walked toward the exit, each step feeling more solid than the last. The afternoon sun hit my face as I stepped outside, warm and real and mine. The divorce was final. My old life was over, which meant, for the first time in 5 years, I was free to become anyone at all. 3 months later, I stood in the middle of McCarran International Airport with a single suitcase and a credit card that had exactly $3,000 left on it. Las Vegas sprawled beyond the terminal windows, all heat shimmer and impossible architecture rising from the desert like a fever dream. My sister Emma had insisted on the trip. "You need to get out of your head," she'd said, booking the flight before I could protest. "Go somewhere completely different. Somewhere Derek would never go. Lose yourself for a week." Derek hated Vegas, called it tacky, desperate, a city for people with more money than taste, which made it perfect. The hotel Emma had chosen was on the Strip, but not one of the massive casino resorts. The Palazzo Nero was smaller, more exclusive, its black glass exterior reflecting the desert sun like obsidian. The lobby was a study in contrasts. Modern minimalism with touches of old-world Baroque. Cream marble floors, dramatic chandeliers that looked like frozen waterfalls, and everywhere the subtle scent of jasmine and leather. Ms. Aldridge. The concierge was impeccably dressed, his accent placing him somewhere in Eastern Europe. "Welcome to the Palazzo Nero. We have you in one of our deluxe suites on the 20th floor. If there's anything you need during your stay, anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask." The emphasis on anything sent a small thrill through me. This was a different world, operating under different rules. No one here knew me as Derek's wife, as the woman who'd been discarded and diminished. Here, I was just another guest, anonymous and free. My suite was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Strip, a bathroom larger than my sister's entire apartment, and a bed that looked like it belonged in a palace. I dropped my suitcase and walked to the window, pressing my palm against the glass. The city sprawled below, already coming alive as afternoon shifted toward evening. For the first time in months, I felt something other than numb grief. Anticipation, maybe. Or possibility. I showered and changed into the one decent dress I owned, a simple black sheath that Emma had forced me to pack. "You're going to dinner at least once somewhere nice," she'd insisted. "Wear the dress, order the expensive wine. Remember what it feels like to be treated like you matter." The hotel's signature restaurant was called Noir, accessible through a private elevator from the lobby. The hostess looked up as I approached, her smile professional but warm. "Good evening. Do you have a reservation?" "No, I'm sorry. I should have called ahead." She glanced at her computer screen, then back at me. "We're quite full tonight, but let me see what I can do. One moment, please." I was about to suggest I come back another night when a voice spoke behind me, low and measured with an accent I couldn't quite place. "She can have my table." I turned to find a man standing close enough that I caught his scent, sandalwood and something darker, more complex. He was tall, broad-shouldered in a way that suggested discipline rather than vanity, wearing a black suit that looked like it had been tailored specifically for his frame. Dark hair swept back from a face that was all sharp angles and careful control. But it was his eyes that stopped me, gray, almost silver in the restaurant's low light, and fixed on me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Mr. Marchetti, that's very kind, but—" the hostess began. "I insist." He didn't look away from me. "I've had a table reserved for an hour and haven't used it. Better it goes to someone who will appreciate it." "I couldn't," I managed, though something in me wanted to say yes, wanted to see what would happen if I accepted this stranger's offer. "You could." The faintest smile touched his mouth. "Consider it Vegas hospitality. I own the hotel. It would be a shame if our guests couldn't enjoy our best restaurant." He owned the hotel. Of course he did. This man radiated the kind of quiet power that Derek had always performed, but never actually possessed. "Thank you," I heard myself saying. "That's very generous." "Enjoy your evening, Ms. Vivian," I supplied. Not Mrs. Aldridge, not Derek's wife, just Vivian. "Vivian." He repeated my name like he was tasting it, committing it to memory. "I'm Roman. If you need anything during your stay, tell them to call me directly." Then he was gone, moving through the lobby with the fluid economy of movement that suggested he was always aware of his surroundings, always in control. The hostess escorted me to a corner table with a view of the Strip, the lights beginning their nightly show as darkness fell. I ordered the wine Emma had insisted on, something French and obscenely expensive, and tried to process what had just happened. A stranger, Roman, had given me his table. In his hotel. A hotel he owned. The wine arrived, and I took a sip, letting the complexity of flavors ground me. Cherry and oak and something smoky. It tasted like money and confidence and everything my life with Derek had pretended to be, but never was. "How is it?" I looked up to find Roman standing beside my table, hands in his pockets, that same careful control in his posture. "It's perfect," I said honestly. "May I join you for a moment? I promise not to intrude on your dinner." I should have said no. Should have maintained the safe distance of grateful guest and generous owner. Instead, I gestured to the empty chair. He sat with the same fluid grace, drawing attention from nearby tables. People noticed him, I realized, not with the desperate hunger for celebrity, but with the wariness of recognizing real power. "You're here alone," he observed. Not a question. "Is that unusual?" "In Vegas?" "Yes. Most people come here to escape with someone, or to find someone. You seem to be doing neither. Maybe I'm escaping from someone." The wine had loosened my tongue, made me bolder than I'd been in years. Something flickered in those gray eyes. Interest, perhaps, or recognition. Recently? 3 months ago. Divorce finalized today, actually. Well, yesterday, technically, given the time difference. Ah. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with an attention that should have felt invasive, but instead felt seen. Let me guess. He was conventional, ambitious, image-conscious. Probably worked in finance or law. He made you feel small, convinced you that his vision of your life was the only one that mattered. I stared at him, stunned by the accuracy. "You've met my ex-husband?" "I've met many men like him." Roman's voice held contempt, carefully modulated but unmistakable. "They collect beautiful things, art, cars, wives, and then grow bored when those things don't remain exactly as they imagined them. It's a particular kind of weakness, mistaking control for strength." The waiter arrived with my appetizer, and Roman ordered whiskey without looking at the menu. We sat in comfortable silence while I took a bite of the most perfect scallop I'd ever tasted. "Why did you give me your table?" I asked finally. "Because you looked like someone who needed to remember she deserved good things." He said it simply, as if it were obvious. "And because I wanted an excuse to talk to you. You own a hotel in Las Vegas. I'm sure you don't need excuses to talk to anyone." His smile was genuine this time, transforming his face. "Fair point. Let me be more honest then. You interested me. Most people who come to Vegas alone are running from something or chasing something. You seem to be doing neither. Just existing." I found that compelling. Existing isn't very exciting. It's the hardest thing to do when everything else has fallen apart. His whiskey arrived, and he raised the glass slightly. "To existing, and to ex-husbands who don't deserve another moment of your thoughts." I clinked my wine glass against his tumbler, something warming in my chest that had nothing to do with alcohol. We talked through my dinner and into the evening. Roman asked questions that Derek never had. What I'd studied in college, what had drawn me to interior design, what my favorite building in New York was and why. He listened with complete attention, as if every word mattered, as if I mattered. In turn, I learned he'd grown up in Italy, moved to the States 15 years ago, built his business from nothing. He collected modern art, preferred architecture to people, and thought Vegas was the perfect American city because it was honest about what it was. Most cities pretend to be something noble. Cultural capitals, financial centers, historical monuments, he explained. Vegas admits it's about pleasure and risk, and the beautiful disaster of human nature. I respect that. The restaurant was closing when I finally checked my watch, shocked that 4 hours had passed. Roman walked me to the elevator, his hand resting lightly on the small of my back, a gesture that Derek had used to steer and control, but that Roman made feel protective. "Thank you for letting me intrude on your evening," he said as the elevator arrived. "Thank you for the table. And the conversation. Vivian." He said my name again, and I loved the way it sounded in his accent. Slightly different, more substantial. Would you have dinner with me tomorrow? Properly this time, not just stealing time in my own restaurant. I should have said no. Should have maintained boundaries. Remembered that I was here to heal, not to leap into something new. But standing there, with Roman's gray eyes holding mine and the ghost of Derek's voice echoing, "You'll never get over me," I felt something shift. "Yes," I said. "I'd like that." His smile was slow, satisfied. "Good. I'll pick you up at 7. The elevator doors closed on his face, and I rode up to my floor feeling lighter than I had in months. This was probably foolish, probably reckless, probably exactly what Emma had meant when she'd said lose yourself for a week. But when I walked into my suite and saw my reflection in the window, flushed, eyes bright, alive, I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. And that felt like progress. Roman picked me up at 7 precisely, dressed in a different black suit that somehow made the previous one look casual. He drove a Maserati that handled the Vegas Strip traffic with the same fluid grace he brought to everything else, navigating toward the outskirts of the city, where the neon faded into desert darkness. "Where are we going?" I asked, watching the lights recede behind us. "Somewhere we won't be interrupted." He glanced at me, reading my tension. "I promise you're safe, Vivian. I just thought you might appreciate a break from the noise." The restaurant was built into the side of a canyon, glass walls offering views of the desert floor below. It was small, maybe 8 tables, and apparently required reservations months in advance. Roman was greeted by name, escorted to a private section where we could see the stars beginning to emerge overhead. "This is incredible," I breathed, watching the last light fade from the sky. "I thought you'd appreciate good design. The architect is a friend. He specializes in buildings that work with landscape rather than against it." Over dinner, our conversation deepened. Roman asked about my marriage not with prurient curiosity, but genuine interest in understanding who I'd been, who I was becoming. I found myself telling him things I hadn't told anyone. How Derek had slowly eroded my confidence, convinced me my career was a hobby, made me believe that supporting his success was the same as building my own. He was very good at making his needs seem like our needs, I explained, pushing gnocchi around my plate. By the time I realized what was happening, I'd already given up so much that starting over felt impossible. "But you did it anyway." Roman's voice held something that might have been respect. "You left. I didn't have a choice. Once I saw him with her, in our bed, I couldn't unsee it. Couldn't pretend anymore. Most people find ways to pretend. It's easier than blowing up your life." "Have you ever been married?" I asked, deflecting from my own pain. He was quiet for a moment, swirling wine in his glass. "No. I've seen what marriage does to people. The compromises, the slow erosion of self. I decided early that I wasn't built for it. That's lonely. Lonely is better than diminished." He met my eyes, though I'm beginning to wonder if I was wrong about that. The air between us felt charged, electric. I should have pulled back, maintained distance, remembered that I was barely divorced and in no position to start something new. Instead, I leaned in. "What changed your mind?" A woman in a courthouse 3 months ago, signing away 5 years of her life. Alone. Scared. But doing it anyway because staying was worse than leaving. His hand covered mine on the table, warm and solid. "You changed my mind, Vivian." I should have questioned how he knew those details. Should have wondered why a man who owned a Vegas hotel would be at a New York courthouse on a random Tuesday afternoon. But I was caught in his gray eyes, in the intensity of being truly seen by someone for the first time in years. "Roman, Don't," he interrupted gently. "Don't analyze it. Don't question it. Just feel it. So I did. I let him kiss me in the parking lot under desert stars, let him drive me back to the hotel with his hand on my thigh, let him come up to my suite and show me what it felt like to be wanted with complete attention and devastating skill. Afterward, lying tangled in sheets that cost more than my car, I asked the question that had been building since that first night. Why me? You could have anyone. Roman traced patterns on my shoulder, his touch light and claiming at once. Because you're not trying to be anyone. You're just surviving. And survival is the most honest thing a person can do. The week I'd planned to stay stretched into 2, then 3. Roman introduced me to his city. Not the Vegas tourists saw, but the one that existed in the spaces between. Private clubs where politicians and moguls made deals over whiskey. Art galleries showcasing work that would never see public museums. Restaurants that didn't advertise because their clientele found them through word of mouth. I learned he owned not just the Palazzo Nero, but 4 other hotels on the Strip. That his import business dealt in art and antiquities, though he was deliberately vague about the details. That he was respected and feared in equal measure, and that people moved aside when he walked into a room. I should have questioned more. Should have wondered why cash was his preferred currency. Why certain calls made him step away to speak in rapid Italian. Why men with hard eyes and expensive suits were always nearby when we went out. But I was in love. Recklessly, completely in love with a man who treated me like I was precious and powerful at once. Who listened when I talked about design with the same attention he gave to his business dealings. Who made love to me like he was memorizing every inch of my body, claiming and worshiping simultaneously. "Come with me to Italy," he said one morning, 3 weeks into what was supposed to be a week-long trip. We were having breakfast on his penthouse terrace. Because of course he had a penthouse above the hotel. Of course it was stunning. "I have business in Milan, but afterward we could go to the coast. I want to show you where I'm from." "Roman, I can't just..." "Why not?" He set down his espresso, giving me his complete attention. "What's waiting for you in New York? Your sister has her own life. You have no job, no home. Derek took everything. So why not take something for yourself?" He was right. I had nothing to go back to except the slow work of rebuilding a life I wasn't sure I wanted anymore. And here, in Vegas, in Roman's world, I felt alive, wanted, powerful. "Okay," I heard myself saying. "Yes, let's go to Italy." His smile transformed his face, and he pulled me into his lap, kissing me until I forgot every reason this was probably a terrible idea. We flew private, my first time in a jet that wasn't commercial. Roman worked during the flight, speaking Italian into his phone with an intensity I hadn't seen before. There was something harder in him here, away from Vegas. Something that reminded me he was more than just a successful businessman. Milan was beautiful and intimidating. Roman's business involved meetings in back rooms of exclusive restaurants, conversations in rapid Italian that I couldn't follow. But afterward, he was completely mine, driving me through Tuscany to a villa that had been in his family for generations, walking me through Florence galleries, teaching me to taste the difference between wines from neighboring regions. "My family was poor when I was growing up," he told me one night, watching sunset from the villa's terrace. "My father worked construction, my mother cleaned houses. They wanted me to be a doctor, something respectable and safe." What happened? I realized that respectability was for people who had nothing else to offer. I wanted power. Real power. Not the kind that comes from degrees and credentials, but the kind that makes people step aside when you enter a room. And you got it. I took it. He turned to face me, his expression serious. "I'm not a good man, Vivian. I've done things that would horrify you, but with you, I want to be better, want to deserve you." I should have asked what things. Should have pressed for details, demanded honesty about the source of his wealth and power. But I was selfish, caught in the fantasy of being loved completely by a man who seemed capable of anything. "Then, be better," I whispered. "For both of us." He proposed on a beach in Positano at sunset, producing a ring that was both elegant and substantial, a 3-carat diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the light like captured stars. I said yes before he'd finished asking, jumping into his arms with an abandon I hadn't felt since I was a child. We married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the villa, just us and a handful of Roman's closest friends, men with careful eyes and expensive suits, who congratulated us with the formal precision of people conducting business rather than celebrating a wedding. I told myself it was because Roman was private, because he valued intimacy over spectacle. I didn't let myself wonder why no family was present, why he made calls in another room when I walked by, why some of his art dealers looked more like soldiers than businessmen. I was 29, married to a man who made me feel alive, living in a world that bore no resemblance to the safe, small life I'd built with Derek. And when Roman held me at night in our villa bed, whispering Italian endearments I was slowly learning to understand, I convinced myself that not knowing everything was the same as knowing enough. After all, Derek had been completely transparent about who he was, and that hadn't protected me from devastation. Maybe mystery was safer than truth. Maybe not asking questions was the same as trust. I would learn how wrong I was, but not yet. Not while the Italian sun was warm on my skin, and Roman's ring was heavy on my finger, and the ghost of Derek's voice, "You'll never get over me," seemed like nothing more than a distant, laughable memory. 2 years of marriage to Roman had taught me to recognize the subtle shifts in his mood, the almost imperceptible changes that preceded something significant. That morning in our Las Vegas penthouse, we split our time between Italy and Nevada now. I noticed the tension in his shoulders as he stood at the window, phone pressed to his ear, speaking low and fast in Italian. I'd learned enough of the language to catch fragments, a name I didn't recognize, the word problem. And then, surprisingly, Derek. My ex-husband's name in Roman's mouth sent a chill through me. In 2 years, we'd never discussed Derek beyond those initial conversations. Roman knew the basics, the divorce, the betrayal, the humiliation. But I'd never mentioned Derek's full name, never wanted to poison my new life with memories of my old one. So how did Roman know it? And why was he talking about him now? He ended the call and turned, his expression carefully neutral, the same face he wore when conducting business, when the other side of his life, the side I'd learned not to ask about directly, bled into our domestic space. "Buongiorno, cara." He crossed to kiss me, and I tasted espresso and something else. Concern, perhaps, or calculation. "Who's Derek?" I asked, deciding against pretense. Roman's gray eyes studied me, and I could see him weighing options, deciding how much truth to offer. "Your ex-husband. He's been making inquiries." My stomach dropped. "What kind of inquiries?" "About you. About me. About how a woman who left her marriage with nothing is now living in a penthouse and splitting time between continents." He poured coffee with steady hands, but I noticed how carefully he measured his words. He's been asking questions of people who don't appreciate questions. What does that mean? It means Derek has been trying to leverage information about us, about me specifically, to some business associates of mine, suggesting that he has something they might want. Details about your past that might prove interesting. The way he said interesting made my skin crawl. What kind of details could he possibly have? Roman handed me the coffee, then sat across from me at the breakfast table. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting everything in stark clarity. "That depends. Is there anything from your marriage I should know about? Anything Derek might use as leverage?" "No." I searched my memory frantically. We had a conventional marriage, boring even. I decorated our home, supported his career, attended dinner parties. There's nothing scandalous or useful there. Then he's bluffing. Roman relaxed slightly, trying to create value from nothing. It's what desperate men do when they've exhausted other options. Why would Derek be desperate? He won the divorce, got everything he wanted. Did he? Roman's smile was cold. He got assets, property, investments. But what he lost was control over you. Some men can't tolerate that. The thought of Derek obsessing over me, over my new life, felt surreal. He'd been so certain I'd never move on, never build anything bigger than what we'd had. The idea that my success might bother him hadn't occurred to me. "What are you going to do?" I asked carefully. "I'm going to have a conversation with him." Roman's tone was casual, but something in his eyes made my pulse quicken. Make sure he understands that his inquiries are unwelcome, that his interest in my wife's past is problematic. "Roman, I don't want you to hurt him." "I'm not going to hurt him, Vivian." He reached across the table, capturing my hand. "I'm simply going to explain certain realities. Derek operates in a world of lawyers and contracts and civilized competition. He thinks those rules apply everywhere. I'll help him understand they don't." I should have pressed harder, should have demanded specifics about what kind of conversation Roman planned. But part of me, the part that still carried Derek's words like scar tissue, wanted to know that someone was protecting me, that I wasn't alone and vulnerable anymore. "When?" I asked. "This week. He's in Vegas, interestingly enough. Probably thought he'd confront you directly, make some dramatic scene." Roman's expression darkened. He won't get that chance. I spent the next 3 days in a state of low-grade anxiety, waiting for Roman to mention the meeting, to tell me what had happened. But he said nothing, carrying on with his usual business, calls with associates, meetings at the hotel, dinners with men whose exact role in his empire I'd learned not to examine too closely. On the 4th day, I woke to find Roman already dressed, standing at the window with his phone, that same tense posture from earlier in the week. "E fatto," he said into the phone. "It's done." Then, listening, "No, he won't be a problem anymore." My blood ran cold. "Roman?" He turned, ending the call. "Buongiorno, I didn't mean to wake you." "What's done? What were you talking about?" He crossed to the bed, sitting on the edge. "Derek, I had the conversation I mentioned. He's been encouraged to redirect his attention elsewhere." "What does that mean?" My voice rose despite my attempt at control. "What did you do to him?" "Nothing he didn't bring upon himself." Roman's voice was calm, measured. "He came to Vegas with documentation he claimed proved you'd known about my business operations before we married, that you were complicit in certain activities. It was all fabrication, of course, but he was shopping it to anyone who might pay for information about me." Horror washed through me. "He was trying to implicate me in your business?" "He was trying to create leverage, to force you back into his orbit by making you dependent on his silence." Roman's jaw tightened. "It was clumsy and stupid and dangerous, for both of you. So what happened?" I explained to Derek that fabricating evidence against my wife was inadvisable, that certain parties don't appreciate being leveraged by amateurs, that his continued interest in our lives was creating complications he couldn't imagine. Roman's eyes held mine. He understood. Eventually. Where is he now? I don't know, and neither should you. He stood, smoothing his suit. Derek is no longer a factor in our life, Vivian. That's all that matters. But it wasn't all that mattered. Derek's attempt to insert himself back into my life, to threaten the safety I'd built, change something fundamental. For 2 years, I'd existed in a kind of willful ignorance about the full extent of Roman's world. I'd known he was more than a hotel owner, that his wealth came from sources beyond art dealing and real estate. But I'd never confronted the reality directly. Now I couldn't avoid it. My ex-husband had been handled, had become no longer a problem. In the language Roman used, those phrases had specific meanings, and none of them were good. "Did you hurt him?" I asked directly. "Did your people hurt him?" Roman's expression didn't change. Would it matter if they had? The question hung between us, sharp and inescapable. Would it matter? Derek had betrayed me, humiliated me, tried to use me as a pawn in some scheme against Roman. Did I care if he'd been frightened? Threatened? Worse? "I need to know what happened," I said finally. "No, you don't." Roman moved to the closet, selecting a tie. "You need to trust that I protect what's mine, that I don't allow threats to my family. Beyond that, the details serve no purpose. I'm not a child, Roman. I deserve to know. You deserve to be safe." He turned, and for the first time I saw something raw in his expression. Fear, maybe, or desperation. "You deserve to live without constantly looking over your shoulder, wondering if the past will destroy the future. I gave you that. Don't ask me to apologize for it." We stared at each other across the bedroom, and I felt the foundations of my carefully constructed denial cracking. I'd married a man whose world operated by rules I didn't understand, consequences I couldn't fathom. I'd known that intellectually, but had never been forced to confront it emotionally. Until now. "I'm meeting Alessandro at the Palazzo Nero at 10, Roman said, his voice gentler. "Come with me. We'll have lunch after, somewhere you love. Try to pretend today is normal." "Is any day normal with you?" His smile was sad. "No, Kara, not remotely. But that's what you chose when you said yes to me." He was right. I had chosen this, chosen him, chosen a life of luxury and mystery and unspoken dangers. I'd traded one cage for another, Derek's suffocating control for Roman's protective ruthlessness. But at least this cage was gilded with genuine love, with partnership, with the knowledge that someone valued me enough to eliminate threats on my behalf. I dressed and went with him to the hotel, playing the role of contented wife through meetings with managers and brief conversations with staff. We had lunch at a French place I loved, talked about redecorating the villa in Positano, discussed possible vacation destinations. Normal conversation. Normal life. Except for Derek's absence hanging over everything, a ghost whose disappearance I was choosing not to investigate. That evening I called my sister for the first time in weeks. Emma answered on the second ring, her voice bright. "Viv, finally. I was beginning to think you'd forgotten my number." "Never. I've just been busy." "Busy living the dream life, you mean? How's Italy? How's Roman?" "Good. Everything's good." I paused, weighing my words. "Em, do you remember Derek's work colleagues? Anyone he might have kept in touch with after the divorce?" "Ugh, why are we talking about him?" She made a dismissive sound. "I haven't thought about that asshole in months." "Why?" "Just curious. Has anyone mentioned seeing him recently?" "Not that I've heard." "Why? Is he bothering you?" "No, nothing like that." I forced brightness into my voice. "Just wondering what he's up to these days." We talked for another 15 minutes, Emma filling me in on her new boyfriend and job drama. But my mind was elsewhere, circling around the question I couldn't quite bring myself to ask anyone who might actually answer it. Where was Derek? And what, exactly, did "no longer a problem" mean in Roman's world? That night, lying in bed next to my husband who had slipped into sleep with enviable ease, I made a decision. I would stop asking questions, would accept the protection Roman offered without examining its cost, would trust that the man who held me with such tenderness wasn't capable of the things my imagination conjured in the darkness. I would choose willful ignorance, choose safety over certainty, choose the gilded cage over the dangerous truth. It was a choice I'd live with for the rest of my life. But lying there in the dark, with Roman's steady breathing beside me, and Derek's fate unspoken between us, I couldn't entirely silence the small voice asking whether I'd escaped one kind of prison, only to enter another. The difference was that this time, I'd walked in with my eyes open. More or less. And I'd chosen the lock myself. 3 years into my marriage to Roman, I'd become someone I barely recognized. Not in a bad way, or at least, I told myself it wasn't bad. I ran the legitimate side of Roman's hospitality empire now, overseeing design and operations for all 5 hotels. My eye for aesthetics, dormant during my marriage to Derek, had been revived and refined. I hired architects, managed renovations, negotiated with artists and suppliers. I was good at it, better than good. In 18 months, I'd increased occupancy rates across all properties by 15%, earned features in Architectural Digest and Condé Nast Traveler. Vivian Marchetti, I'd taken Roman's name with the strange relief of shedding my old identity completely, was becoming known in hospitality circles as someone with impeccable taste and ruthless efficiency. The irony wasn't lost on me. Derek had convinced me my career was a hobby, something to occupy my time between supporting his ambitions. Now I was running a multi-million-dollar operation, and Roman deferred to my judgment on anything involving design and guest experience. "You have the vision," he told me when first proposing I take over operations. "I know how to make money. You know how to make people feel like they're somewhere special. Together, we're unstoppable." We were. The Palazzo Nero had become the hottest reservation in Vegas. Roman's other properties, in Milan, Barcelona, and Tokyo, were following suit. I traveled constantly, splitting time between cities, overseeing renovations, mentoring staff, turning Roman's wealth into something tangible and beautiful. It was a good life, a powerful life. Everything Derek had said I'd never achieve. I thought about him sometimes, less frequently now than in those first years, but still. Usually late at night when I couldn't sleep, my mind would drift to the question I'd never fully answered. What had happened to Derek after Roman's conversation? I'd done some searching, trying to maintain plausible deniability while satisfying my curiosity. Derek's LinkedIn had gone dormant 2 years ago. His last known address was in Vegas, the same address where he'd presumably been when Roman had met with him. His phone number no longer worked. His former employer had no forwarding information. It was as if he'd simply vanished, erased from the world with the same efficiency Roman applied to everything else. I told myself he'd probably just moved away, started over somewhere new, the way I had. That Roman had scared him enough to make him disappear voluntarily, to stop his dangerous inquiries and leave us alone. I wanted to believe that. Needed to believe it. Because the alternative meant I was complicit in something unforgivable, and I couldn't be that person. Couldn't be someone who looked the other way while her husband committed violence on her behalf. Except I was looking the other way. Had been for 3 years. "Kara, you're distracted tonight." Roman's voice pulled me back to the present. We were having dinner in our Milan apartment, a restored historical building near the Duomo, with views of the cathedral's spires. Something wrong? Just thinking about the Tokyo renovation. The contractor is pushing back on the timeline. It was a lie, but Roman accepted it with a nod, launching into suggestions about how to handle difficult contractors. He was like that, pragmatic, solution-oriented, willing to apply whatever pressure necessary to get what he wanted. That was the thing about Roman. He wasn't cruel for cruelty's sake. Every action, every decision served a purpose. He protected what was his, eliminated threats, built and maintained power with careful precision. And I was his wife, his partner, his greatest treasure, he liked to say. Which meant he protected me with the same ruthless efficiency he applied to his business empire. After dinner, while Roman took calls in his office, I stood at the window looking out over Milan. The city glittered below, old world charm with modern prosperity. I'd come a long way from that courthouse hallway where Derek had dismissed my entire future with casual cruelty. My phone buzzed. Email from Emma. Subject line all caps. Viv, call me right now. I dialed immediately, concerned. Em, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong, or maybe everything is, I don't know. She sounded breathless, excited. But you need to know something. Derek's missing. My blood went cold. What? Missing. Like officially missing. I just saw his sister post about it on Facebook. She's asking if anyone has heard from him in the past 2 years. 2 years, Viv. She filed a missing persons report, but apparently the police aren't taking it seriously because he's an adult who left no evidence of foul play. I sank into a chair, my legs suddenly weak. I don't understand. How is he just missing? That's what I want to know. The last anyone heard from him, he was in Vegas. Vegas, Viv. Where you were when you met Roman. And now he's just gone. She paused. Please tell me this is a coincidence. Of course it's a coincidence. My voice sounded distant, not quite convincing even to my own ears. Derek probably just wanted to disappear. Start over. You know how he was. All about image and control. Maybe he decided to walk away from his old life. Without telling his family? Without closing his bank accounts or selling his condo? His sister says all his stuff is still in storage, untouched. His car was found abandoned at the airport 2 years ago. It's weird, Viv. Really weird. Em, I need to go. Roman just got off his call. Vivian, wait. I'm serious. If you know anything, I don't. I promise. Derek is ancient history. I haven't thought about him in years. Another lie. But easier than the truth. That I thought about Derek every time I looked at my beautiful life and wondered what it cost. Every time Roman made problems disappear with disturbing ease. Every time I allowed myself to enjoy wealth and power built on foundations I'd never examined too closely. I ended the call and sat in the gathering darkness, Emma's words echoing. 2 years. Derek had been missing for exactly 2 years, since right around the time Roman had assured me he was no longer a problem. Everything okay? Roman appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie. I heard you on the phone. Just Emma. She's having boyfriend troubles. Ah. He crossed to pour whiskey from the bar cart, holding up a glass in question. I shook my head. Alessandro confirmed the Barcelona property is ready for your visit next week. I thought we could make it a few days, stay at the villa afterward. You've been working too hard. Roman. I watched him settle into the chair across from me, whiskey in hand. Can I ask you something? And will you be honest? His expression grew cautious. Of course. Derek, my ex-husband. What happened to him? Really? Roman took a long sip of whiskey, his gray eyes steady on mine. Why are you asking this now? Because his family filed a missing persons report. Because he's been gone for 2 years, exactly 2 years, and no one knows where he is. Because I need to know if my happiness is built on someone else's suffering. Your happiness, Roman said carefully, is built on your own talent and my resources. What happened to Derek has nothing to do with either. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I'm going to give you. He set down his glass. Vivian, I've protected you from certain realities because you don't need to carry that weight. What matters is that Derek can't hurt you anymore. Can't use you or threaten you or make you feel small. Everything else is irrelevant. It's not irrelevant if you killed him. The words hung between us, stark and terrible. Roman's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Not guilt, more like resignation. Is that what you think I did? I don't know what to think. That's why I'm asking. He stood, moving to the window where I'd stood earlier, looking out at the city. If I told you yes, he said quietly. If I confirmed your worst suspicions, what would you do? Leave me? Go to the police? Destroy everything we've built? I don't know. Exactly. You don't know because you don't actually want the answer. You want reassurance, absolution, permission to enjoy your life without guilt. He turned to face me. So here it is. Derek Aldridge made choices that put him in danger. He tried to threaten you, to use you as leverage against me. He refused multiple opportunities to walk away. What happened to him was the consequence of his own actions. That's still not an answer. It's the answer you're going to get. Roman's voice was firm now, final. I've given you a life you love, work that fulfills you, security that Derek never could. I've made you powerful. If the cost of that bothers you, then you need to decide whether the guilt is worth giving it up. He left the room, and I remained in my chair, staring at the space he'd occupied. He was right, I realized with sick clarity. I didn't actually want a confession. Didn't want the burden of certain knowledge that would force me to act. I wanted exactly what I had, plausible deniability wrapped in luxury. The ability to enjoy my success without examining its foundations too closely. To be powerful without acknowledging that power's price. I was 31 years old. I ran a hotel empire, traveled between beautiful cities, wore designer clothes and expensive jewelry. I had a husband who loved me fiercely, who valued my opinions, who had transformed me from a discarded wife into a woman of substance and influence. And probably, he'd killed my ex-husband to protect me. That night, lying in bed next to Roman, I made my final choice. I wouldn't ask again. Wouldn't investigate. Wouldn't search for Derek or demand answers about his fate. I would accept the protection Roman offered, the power he'd given me, and not examine the cost too closely. It was a choice I'd have to live with. But as Roman's arm tightened around me in sleep, as I looked around at the life we'd built together, I knew I would live with it. Because the alternative, giving all this up, destroying what we had for a truth I couldn't undo, was unthinkable. Derek had been right about one thing, I realized. I would never get over him, but not in the way he'd meant. I'd never get over him because his disappearance, whether literal death or metaphorical erasure, had become the foundation of my transformation. The ghost of Derek's fate would always haunt the edges of my beautiful life, a reminder of what it cost to become powerful. And I'd chosen to pay that price. I'd chosen it then, in that Milan apartment. And I'd keep choosing it, every day, for the rest of my life. Because in the end, the question wasn't whether I could live with what Roman might have done. It was whether I could live without what his protection had given me. And the answer was no. 4 more years passed. I turned 35 in our villa in Positano, surrounded by friends. Roman's friends, really. The wives of his associates. Women who understood the rules of our world without speaking them aloud. We drank expensive wine, ate food prepared by a private chef, and watched the sun set over the Mediterranean, while our husbands discussed business in the villa's lower level. "You're so lucky," Sofia, Alessandro's wife, said. She was younger than me, married only 3 years, still adapting to the complexities of being a mob wife. Yes, that's what we were. I'd stopped pretending otherwise. Roman adores you. Alessandro says he's never seen him this settled. Settled felt like an odd word for a man who ran an empire that spanned legitimate businesses and less legitimate operations across 3 continents. But I understood what she meant. Roman was content with me, fulfilled. Whatever darkness existed in his work life, he left it outside our personal space, most of the time. "You're lucky too," I said, refilling her wine. "Alessandro is good to you." "He is." She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Can I ask you something? How do you handle it? Knowing what they do?" I'd been asked variations of this question before, by other women in similar positions. Women who'd married powerful men and then slowly realized the full extent of their husbands' operations. Women who had to reconcile love with moral complexity. "You focus on what you can control," I said finally. "The legitimate businesses, the family, the parts of their lives where we actually have influence, and the rest. You accept that their world has different rules." "But doesn't it bother you?" Sophia's eyes were earnest, searching. "The violence, the people who get hurt." "Every empire is built on violence," I replied, surprised by how easily the rationalization came now. "Ours is just more honest about it. At least they have rules. No civilians, no children, no one who isn't part of the game. That's more than most legitimate businessmen can say." The words felt true even as I said them, which bothered me more than the violence itself. I'd become someone who could rationalize anything, justify any action if it protected my life and the people I loved. After the guests left, Roman and I walked along the beach, shoes off, the cool water lapping at our feet. He'd been quieter than usual all evening, and I recognized the signs. Something was coming. A shift in our carefully maintained equilibrium. "There's something I need to tell you," he said finally. My stomach tightened. "Okay. Derek Aldridge." The name felt like an intrusion, a ghost suddenly made solid. "His body was found 3 weeks ago. Construction site outside Vegas. They're calling it a homicide." The world tilted. I stopped walking, my feet sinking into wet sand. "What?" "The police are investigating, but they have no leads, no witnesses. The body was buried deep enough that it was purely accidental they found it. Some utility company digging new lines." Roman's voice was calm, factual. "They'll never solve it. The scene was too degraded, too much time passed." "You killed him." Not a question anymore, a statement. "I protected you." He turned to face me, his gray eyes steady in the moonlight. "He was going to destroy you to get to me. Was shopping fabricated evidence to anyone who'd listen, trying to make you culpable in my operations. He didn't care that it would put you in danger, that it would make you a target. All he cared about was revenge, because you'd moved on without him. So you murdered him." I eliminated a threat to my family. Roman's jaw tightened. "Yes, Vivian. I killed Derek Aldridge. Had him killed, to be precise. Quickly, if you care. He didn't suffer beyond the fear beforehand, and then he was gone. And you were safe. I should have felt horror, should have run screaming down the beach, called the police, turned him in. Instead, I felt a strange sense of relief. The not knowing had been worse than knowing, the ambiguity more painful than certainty. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because the investigation will reach you eventually. The police will want to interview you. Routine, given your connection to the victim. I need you prepared. Need you to understand exactly what happened, so you don't accidentally say something that creates problems." "Problems?" I laughed, high and slightly hysterical. "My ex-husband was murdered, and you're worried about creating problems. I'm worried about protecting you." Roman grabbed my arms, gentle but firm. "Derek's death means you're finally free of him completely. No more wondering, no more guilt. He made choices that put him in my crosshairs, and he paid the price. That's how this world works." "And what about my soul?" I pulled away from him. "What happens to that, living with a man who kills to solve problems?" "Your soul was always your own, Kara. I've never asked you to participate in that side of my life. Never involved you in decisions about violence or territory or any of it. You run the hotels. You create beautiful spaces. You use my money to fund scholarships and art programs. Your hands are clean. But I benefit from what you do, from who you are. Everyone benefits from violence somewhere in the chain. At least with me, you know the source. Can make choices with open eyes. He moved closer. I won't apologize for protecting you, Vivian. Not from Derek. Not from anyone. That's what loving you means. Making sure no one can hurt you. Ever. I stared at him. This man I'd loved for 7 years. This man who'd killed for me. And I realized that Emma had been right all those years ago, in that courthouse hallway. I'd never really get over Derek. But not because he'd been my great love, as he'd so arrogantly assumed. Because his death had become the cornerstone of my new life. The foundation that everything else was built on. What do I tell the police? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Relief flashed across Roman's face. The truth, mostly. That you divorced Derek 7 years ago. That you haven't seen or spoken to him since. That you have no knowledge of his activities or whereabouts after the divorce. All of that is technically true. And if they ask about you, you met me 3 months after your divorce in Vegas. We fell in love quickly. You knew I owned hotels, dealt in art and antiquities. You had no knowledge of any other business activities. Also true. You never asked. I never told. His hand cupped my face. You're not complicit, Vivian. You're protected. There's a difference. The police came 2 weeks later, as Roman predicted. 2 detectives, polite and professional, asking routine questions in our Las Vegas penthouse while Roman's lawyer sat beside me. I answered exactly as Roman had instructed, telling truths that omitted the crucial context. Yes, Derek was my ex-husband. No, I hadn't seen him in 7 years. No, I had no knowledge of why he'd been in Vegas, or who might have wanted to hurt him. Yes, I'd been shocked to hear about his death. The lie detector in that last answer was my own surprise at how easily the words came. I had been shocked, not by his death, which I'd suspected, but by the confirmation. By having to confront the reality I'd spent years avoiding. After they left, I stood at the window looking out over the Strip, this city where I'd met Roman, where Derek had died, where my life had transformed from humiliation to power. You did well, Roman said, coming to stand behind me, his arms wrapping around my waist. I lied to the police about a murder. You protected your family. That's different. Maybe it was. Or maybe I'd just become someone capable of enormous moral compromise for the sake of comfort and security. Someone who could rationalize anything if it meant keeping the life I'd built. The investigation went nowhere, as Roman had predicted. Without evidence, without witnesses, Derek's murder became another cold case in a city full of them. His family held a memorial service that I didn't attend, claiming the trauma of our divorce made it too difficult. More lies, but easier ones. A year later, Roman surprised me by acquiring another hotel, this one in New York, walking distance from where Derek and I had lived. The brownstone I'd renovated during our marriage had been sold years ago, but this hotel occupied the same neighborhood, the same streets I used to walk. I thought you'd like to reclaim that space, Roman explained. Make it yours on your terms. I threw myself into renovating the property, transforming it from a tired boutique hotel into a destination. Used every trick I'd learned about design and atmosphere and guest experience, made it the flagship of our collection. On opening night, standing in the lobby I'd created, surrounded by influential guests and critical acclaim, I thought about Derek's last words to me. You'll never get over me. This was the best you'll ever have. He'd been right in a way. I'd never gotten over him. But not because he'd been irreplaceable, or because our marriage had been the pinnacle of my existence. I'd never gotten over him because his death had become the foundation of my power. The secret that bound Roman and me together with unbreakable chains. The price I'd paid, or allowed to be paid on my behalf, for transformation. At 35, I commanded an empire. The hotels bearing my design aesthetic were sought after by celebrities and dignitaries. My name appeared in industry publications, my opinion sought by journalists and competitors. I had wealth, influence, and a husband who would do absolutely anything to protect me, including murder. And I'd chosen to accept that protection, had made peace with blood on foundations I didn't touch directly but benefited from completely, had become someone who could look at a police detective and lie about a murder without hesitation. Derek had been wrong about one thing, though. He hadn't been my peak, my best relationship, my great love. He'd been my prologue. The necessary cruelty that pushed me toward Roman, toward power, toward a life Derek couldn't have imagined. Standing in that hotel lobby, Roman's hand at the small of my back, I finally understood what he'd meant 7 years ago when he'd said, survival was the most honest thing a person could do. I'd survived Derek's cruelty, survived my own naivety, survived learning what my husband was capable of. And in surviving, I'd become someone capable of anything, including living with the knowledge that my ex-husband's murder had bought my freedom. That night, when Roman and I returned to our penthouse and he pulled me close, I kissed him with the fierce gratitude of someone who understood exactly what they'd been given, and what it had cost. Ti amo, I whispered against his mouth. Ti amo, cara. His hands tightened on me. Forever. Forever. Built on a foundation of violence and silence and choices I couldn't undo. But mine. Finally, completely mine. Derek had predicted I'd never get over him. And standing there in Roman's arms, surrounded by the evidence of everything I'd become, I knew he was right. I'd never get over him. I'd just ascended far beyond him. Into a world he couldn't have touched. Into power he couldn't have imagined. Into a life that proved his greatest mistake wasn't underestimating my ability to move on. It was underestimating what I'd become when I did.